Meredith Vale stood in my own kitchen and told my husband I had been meeting another man while he was at work. She had opened my phone on the counter, placed a fake message beside my wedding ring, and called me the kind of woman who stains a family name from the inside. Adrian looked at me like he wanted me to deny it, but his mother kept smiling, slow and certain, as if she had finally dragged me into the dirt where she always believed I belonged. I stayed still. My hands were cold, but my voice was steady when I said, "Before anyone decides what kind of woman I am, you should see what I found in your locked drawer." Welcome back to Pure Drama Stories. This is a story about a cruel mother-in-law, a marriage poisoned by lies, a daughter-in-law pushed past every limit, and a secret so ugly that one quiet piece of proof could tear an entire family apart. To understand why I did not cry in that kitchen, why I did not beg my husband to believe me, and why Meredith suddenly stopped smiling when I mentioned the drawer, I have to take you back to the day she first decided I was not a wife. I was a target. I married Adrian Vale on a warm Saturday in Charleston, South Carolina, in a small white church with old wooden doors and flowers wrapped around the railings. Adrian held my hands like I was the only real thing in the room, and when he whispered, "I know my family can be a lot, but I am choosing you," I believed him. I was not naive enough to think marriage would be perfect, but I was hopeful enough to think love could survive a difficult mother. Meredith watched us from the front row in a cream-colored dress that looked almost bridal, her face calm, her mouth soft, but her eyes fixed on me as if she had already written my verdict. After the ceremony, while people hugged us and said sweet things, Meredith came close enough for her perfume to cover the smell of the flowers. She placed one hand on Adrian's arm and said, "You look happy, darling." Then she turned to me with a smile that no camera could call cruel and added, "Maren, I hope you understand what kind of family you have entered. We value loyalty, we value reputation, and we do not tolerate women who mistake marriage for an opportunity." Adrian laughed a little, uncomfortable, and said, "Mom, don't start." But Meredith touched his cheek like he was still a boy and replied, "I am not starting anything. I am simply making sure your wife knows the standards." I should have answered. I should have said that I had married her son, not applied for a position beneath her. But it was my wedding day, and I wanted peace more than pride. So I smiled and said, "I understand loyalty very well, Mrs. Vale." She looked at me for a second longer than necessary and said, "Then prove it." That was the first thing my mother-in-law ever truly gave me, a warning wrapped like advice. Adrian and I moved into the guest wing of the Vale family house because Harrison, his father, had asked us to stay for 6 months while Adrian settled into a new role at the family real estate firm. Harrison was quiet, polished, and easier to be around than Meredith. He shook my hand when I arrived with my boxes and said, "This house has too many empty rooms. It will be good to hear young voices again." Meredith stood behind him with her arms folded and said, "Young voices are fine, Harrison. Noise is another matter." Then she looked at my 2 suitcases and asked, "Is that everything you own, or is the rest arriving in a truck?" When I said it was mostly everything, she gave a small laugh and answered, "How efficient." Adrian always did have a charitable heart. That night, while Adrian unpacked our books, he tried to explain her away. He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing the back of his neck, and said, "She grew up around people who judge everything: clothes, schools, money, family names. It's not really about you." I folded one of his shirts and said, "It feels very much about me." He came behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and whispered, "Give her time. She will see what I see." I wanted to believe that, because believing him was easier than admitting that his mother had looked at me like a stain she intended to scrub out. Meredith did not waste time. On my third morning in the house, I came downstairs and found her rearranging the breakfast table I had set. She moved every plate 1 inch to the left, every fork into a new angle, and when I asked if I had done something wrong, she said, "Not wrong, dear. Just ordinary. We are not ordinary in this family." Then, when Adrian came in, she smiled like sunshine and said, "Your wife made breakfast. Isn't that sweet? She is learning." Adrian kissed my temple and said, "Thank you, love." But I saw Meredith's face behind his shoulder. She was not thanking me. She was training me. The first real humiliation came during Sunday lunch. Harrison had invited 2 couples from the neighborhood, and Meredith asked me to help serve because the caterer canceled, although I later found the caterer's confirmation email printed in her office. I carried plates from the kitchen while everyone sat at the long dining table, and when one of the women said, "Maren, won't you sit?" Meredith answered before I could speak. She placed a hand over her heart and said, "Oh, she insisted on helping. She is very eager to contribute in the ways she can." Adrian frowned and said, "Mom, Maren is not staff." But Meredith gave him a wounded look and replied, "Of course not. I was praising her. Must everything be misunderstood now?" After the guests left, I told Adrian I did not like the way she spoke about me. We were standing near the staircase, and I tried to keep my voice even as I said, "She made me look like hired help in front of your friends." Adrian leaned against the railing and said, "They are not my friends. They are my parents' circle. And I know she can be sharp, but if we react every time, she wins." I asked, "And if we never react, what does she win then?" He had no answer. He only looked tired, and that became his pattern with Meredith. Exhaustion instead of action, apology instead of protection. Meredith understood that weakness better than I did. She called him when he was at work. She knocked on our door when I was alone. She corrected my clothes, my voice, my cooking, my thank you notes, the way I held a glass, the way I said certain names. Once, when I wore a simple blue dress to a family dinner, she stopped me in the hallway and said, "Maren, that color is very hopeful on you." I said, "Is hopeful bad?" She smiled and answered, "On a woman trying to rise too quickly, yes, it can look desperate." Then she walked into the dining room and told everyone, "Doesn't she look sweet? Like she is trying so hard." I began to understand that Meredith did not scream because she did not need to. She could cut someone open with compliments. She could make a room laugh without anyone realizing who was bleeding. One evening, when Brenna, Adrian's sister, came over for dinner, Meredith told a story about how Adrian had once dated a senator's daughter with perfect manners. Brenna glanced at me and said, "Oh yes, Carolyn. Mom loved her." Meredith sighed and said, "Carolyn understood our world." Adrian put down his fork and said, "I married Maren." Meredith touched his hand and said, "Yes, darling, we all make brave choices when we are young." Brenna was not as careful as her mother. She was pretty, sharp, and permanently bored by people she considered beneath her. She asked me questions that were not questions. "Did you go to a public university?" she asked one night, and when I said yes, she replied, "That must have been grounding." Another time she looked at my shoes and said, "I love when women are practical. It takes confidence not to care." Adrian told her to stop, and she rolled her eyes at him, saying, "I am being nice. Your wife is sensitive." Meredith watched all of it with quiet satisfaction, the general who never dirtied her hands because soldiers were eager to do it for her. Still, Adrian and I had good moments when we were alone. He would come into our room after work, loosen his tie, and say, "Tell me something normal." I would tell him about the bookstore downtown where I had found a job helping with events and inventory. He would tell me about frustrating meetings with Harrison, who expected him to learn every corner of the business. Sometimes we ate takeout on the floor because we did not want to sit at Meredith's table. In those moments, I could see the man I married. He was kind, he was funny, he loved me. But love without courage is a house with beautiful windows and no locks. Meredith started working on him slowly. At first, she only asked little questions while pretending to worry. "Does Maren seem lonely here?" she asked him. "Does she miss her old friends?" Then the questions became sharper. Why does she guard her phone? Why does she go downtown so often? Why does she need a job if she married into stability? Adrian told me about some of it because he thought it was absurd, and I would say, "You see what she is doing, don't you?" He would kiss my forehead and answer, "I see it. I just don't want to fight every day." But Meredith did want to fight every day. She simply wanted me blamed for the war. The first fake seed appeared as a handwritten note tucked inside my coat pocket. I found it after a charity luncheon Meredith had forced me to attend. It said, "Last night meant more than you know. Meet me again soon." There was no name, no date, no handwriting I recognized. I showed it to Adrian before anyone else could. He stared at it and said, "What is this?" I said, "A trap." He looked at me, then at the note, and I saw the tiny crack Meredith had been waiting for. He did not accuse me, but he did not laugh either. He said, "Why would someone put this in your coat?" I answered, "Because your mother wants you to ask that question." Adrian brought the note to Meredith, which was exactly what he should not have done. She took it between two fingers like it was dirty and whispered, "Oh, Adrian." He said, "Mom, did you put this in Maren's pocket?" Meredith's face changed as if he had slapped her. "How could you ask me that?" she said, her voice trembling just enough. "Your wife finds a romantic note in her coat, and your first instinct is to accuse your mother?" I stood beside him and said, "It was not there before the luncheon." Meredith turned to me with tears gathering in her eyes and replied, "Maren, I have tried so hard to welcome you. Do not punish me because your secrets are becoming inconvenient." That night, Adrian apologized to her. I heard him in the hallway saying, "I'm sorry, Mom. I just don't know what is happening." Meredith answered softly, "I know, my darling. That is what scares me. A good liar makes everyone feel confused." When he came back to our room, I was sitting on the bed with the note in my lap. He said, "I don't believe you cheated." I looked at him and said, "That sentence should not need the word believe. You know me." He sat beside me and whispered, "I do know you." But his voice did not sound like a wall. It sounded like a door left open. A week later, Meredith invited me into her private sitting room, the one with old family portraits and a locked walnut desk she never let anyone touch. She poured tea I did not ask for and said, "Maren, woman to woman, I think you should consider whether this marriage is making you happy." I kept my hands in my lap and said, "It is not the marriage making me unhappy." She smiled. "Careful. Bitterness wrinkles young faces." I asked, "Why do you hate me so much?" She leaned back, studying me with almost amused patience, and said, "I do not hate you. I hate what you represent." Adrian could have had a life that strengthened this family. Instead, he brought home a woman with no roots, no standing, and too much quiet confidence. Women like you are dangerous because men mistake your silence for depth. I remember laughing once, not because it was funny, but because something inside me refused to collapse for her. Meredith's eyes hardened. She set down her cup and said, "Do not test me, Maren. You are here because my son is sentimental. Sentiment fades. Blood remains." I stood and said, "Then maybe you should trust your blood to choose well." She rose too, slower than me, and answered, I trust my blood. I do not trust the woman trying to redirect it. That was the day I understood her mission completely. She did not want me humbled. She wanted me removed. My first clue about Meredith's own secret came by accident. I was looking for gift wrap in the laundry room cabinet because Harrison's birthday was the next day, when an envelope slipped from behind a stack of folded table linens. It was not hidden well, only hidden from people who never looked closely. Inside were 2 receipts from a hotel near the waterfront, both charged to a name I did not recognize. Clifton Shaw. One receipt had Meredith's initials written in blue ink beside the room number, and the date matched the same afternoon she had told us she was attending a church committee meeting. My first thought was not affair. My first thought was fear. Because people like Meredith did not hide small things. I put the receipts back exactly where I found them. That evening, when Meredith told Harrison, the committee was exhausting, but someone has to keep standards alive. I watched his face. He smiled at her with the calm trust of a man who had never imagined his wife could lie with such clean hands. Adrian sat beside me, unaware, his knee touching mine under the table. Meredith caught me watching her and said, Maren, you are quiet tonight. Guilty conscience or poor digestion? Brenna laughed. I looked at Meredith and said, just listening. She replied, good. Listening is safer for you than speaking. After that, I began to notice patterns. Meredith had committee meetings every other Thursday. She received calls she took outside near the garden wall. She kept one drawer in her desk locked, and once, when Harrison reached for her handbag to move it from a chair, she snapped, do not touch that. So sharply the room froze. Then she smiled and said, sorry, dear. My migraine medication is inside. Harrison accepted that explanation. I did not. A woman who spent months inventing my affair was hiding something of her own, and the ugliness of it began to make sense. She was not simply cruel. She was afraid. She was accusing me before anyone could think to accuse her. I went to June Pritchard because I needed one sane adult outside the Vale house. June lived in a small yellow home 2 streets away and had spent 30 years as a court clerk before retiring with a mind sharper than anyone at Meredith's table. I met her at the bookstore during a local author event, and she had taken one look at me and said, child, you smile like somebody trained you not to scream. That afternoon, I sat at her kitchen table while she made coffee and told her almost everything. I told her about the note, the insults, the hotel receipts, the locked desk, and the way Adrian believed me, but never loudly enough. June listened without interrupting, then said, never fight a liar with emotion, Maren. They will call your pain proof of instability. Fight them with records. I asked, what records? June leaned back and counted on her fingers as if she had been waiting for me to become serious. Dates, times, screenshots, bank statements if you can get them legally, messages sent to you, messages planted near you, witnesses, security footage, anything that existed before someone had time to explain it away. And do not steal. Do not break into anything. Let wicked people open their own doors. They always do, because arrogance makes them sloppy. I said, I do not want to destroy my husband's family. June looked at me for a long moment and answered, then stop calling it destruction when you are only removing a mask. Meredith's next move was worse. She created an email account using a man's name, then sent Adrian a message that said, your wife is still seeing me. Ask her where she was last Thursday. Adrian showed it to me with a face so pale I almost pitied him more than myself. We were in our room, and he held the phone like it was hot. Tell me this is fake, he said. I answered, it is fake. He swallowed and asked, where were you last Thursday? I said, at June's house. I told you that. He nodded too quickly and replied, I know. I know you did. I took the phone from him and said, Then why is your hand shaking? He whispered, Because my mother said this might happen. That sentence hurt more than the email. I sat on the bed, still holding his phone, and said, Your mother predicted the storm because she is making the weather. Adrian closed his eyes and said, Please don't say it like that. I asked, How should I say it? Softly, so it does not disturb the woman destroying me? He knelt in front of me and put his hands on mine. I am not against you, he said. I looked at him and answered, No, you are beside me when the room is empty, and absent when she enters it. That is not the same as being with me. He bowed his head, and for 1 second I thought he might finally choose. Then Meredith knocked on the door. She entered without waiting, her eyes already wet. Adrian, she said, your father is asking why you look upset. I did not tell him anything, because I refuse to humiliate your wife until the truth is clear. I laughed then, a small, stunned sound, and Meredith turned to me with perfect sorrow. This is not funny, Maren, I said. You are right. It is pathetic. Adrian stood between us and said, Mom, please leave. Meredith looked at him as if he had broken her heart and whispered, I will leave because I love you. But one day, when the truth is too ugly to ignore, I hope you remember who tried to protect you. She walked out, and Adrian followed her with his eyes instead of turning back to me. 2 days later, the pearl necklace disappeared. It was Meredith's favorite necklace, or so she told everyone after making sure everyone knew it was missing. She came into the breakfast room with her hand at her throat and said, My pearls are gone. Harrison looked up from the paper and asked, Gone? Meredith's voice trembled. From my jewelry tray, the clasp was repaired last week, and now they are missing. Brenna gasped dramatically and said, Was anyone in your room? Then both of them looked at me. Adrian said, No, absolutely not. Meredith pressed a tissue under her eye and said, I did not say her name, Adrian, but guilt seems to have entered the room before accusation. I stood at the end of the table and said, I have never touched your jewelry. Meredith answered, I want to believe that. Harrison looked uncomfortable and said, Meredith, perhaps you misplaced it. She turned to him with controlled pain and replied, I know where I keep my things. And I also know when a woman begins to panic because the life she wanted is slipping away. Adrian's chair scraped against the floor. Enough, he said, but his voice broke at the edge. Meredith looked at him and said, Ask her to open her handbag. If she has nothing to hide, it should not matter. I looked at my husband, waiting. He did not ask me, but he also did not say no. I opened the handbag myself because I refused to let her make my dignity look like fear. Inside, under my wallet, wrapped in a napkin I had never seen before, was the pearl necklace. The room went silent. Brenna whispered, Oh my God. Harrison looked at me as if someone had punched him. Adrian stepped back. That step was small, only a few inches, but I felt it like a door closing. Meredith covered her mouth, and the performance was so perfect I almost admired the discipline. She said, Maren, why? I lifted the necklace, placed it on the table, and said, Because you put it there. Meredith's eyes flashed for half a second before the tears returned. Listen to her, she whispered. Even now she attacks me. That was the morning something inside me stopped pleading for fairness. I did not shout. I did not throw the necklace. I did not demand that Adrian choose me in front of them, because a choice forced by panic would not last. Instead, I looked at Harrison and said, I did not steal from your wife? Then I looked at Adrian and added, And I will not live in a house where evidence appears in my bag like magic, and everyone pretends not to know who owns the wand. Meredith said, How dramatic. I answered, No, Meredith, Dramatic is accusing me of theft while hiding hotel receipts in your laundry room. Her face changed so quickly that only I seemed to notice. She recovered before anyone else understood. Hotel receipts? Harrison asked. Meredith gave a tired laugh and said, "This is what desperate people do. They throw strange words into the air and hope someone chases them." I said nothing more. June had told me not to reveal half-proof. A glimpse of fear was useful. A full accusation without records was dangerous. So I left the room, packed a small bag, and went to June's house. Adrian followed me to the driveway, calling my name, and when I turned, he said, "Please don't leave like this." I said, "I am not leaving our marriage. I am leaving your mother's courtroom." He looked broken and asked, "What do I do?" I answered, "You start by asking yourself why the woman who says she loves you keeps needing me to look guilty." For 3 days I stayed with June. Adrian called, he texted. He came by once and sat on June's porch while she watched him through the curtain like a retired judge. I met him outside because I still loved him, even wounded. He said, "I found the email account. It was created 2 days before the message was sent. No activity before that." I asked, "From where?" He hesitated. "I don't know yet." I said, "You can know. You just do not want to." He looked down and admitted, "Part of me is terrified that you are right." I sat beside him on the porch step and said, "Adrian, I am terrified too, but I am the one being buried under lies, and I am still digging. You have to decide whether you want the truth or the comfort of not knowing." He reached for my hand and said, "Come home." I shook my head. "Not until you understand that home cannot mean standing trial every morning," he said. "I will talk to her." I almost smiled because talking to Meredith was like throwing bread into a river and expecting the current to apologize. I said, "Do not talk. Watch." He asked, "Watch what?" I replied, "Her schedule, her stories, her money, her drawer." His face tightened at the last word. "What drawer?" I said, "The one she does not let anyone touch." He whispered, "Maren, if you know something, tell me." I looked at him and said, "I know enough to be careful." Meredith, of course, could not tolerate my absence because a victim outside her house was a witness she could not control. She sent me a message that read, "Running away does not make you innocent." I screenshotted it. Then she sent another. "Adrian deserves a wife who does not humiliate his family." I saved that too. Later she called, and I put her on speaker while June sat across from me with a notepad. Meredith's voice was soft and poisonous. "Maren, you have made your point. Come back before people begin asking why you fled after my necklace was found in your bag." I answered, "People can ask anything they like." She said, "Careful. Once a woman's reputation cracks, no one cares who threw the first stone." June silently wrote that down. I asked Meredith, "Why are you doing this?" There was a pause, and then her voice changed. The sweetness drained away. "Because you should have left when I gave you the chance." I said, "And if I do not?" She laughed quietly. "Then I will make sure my son sees you as I see you. Small, greedy, unfaithful, replaceable." My heart beat hard, but I kept my voice level. "Does Harrison know how easily you use those words?" Another pause. This one was sharper. "Do not bring my husband into this." I said, "Why not?" Meredith replied, "Because women like you do not survive wars with women like me." June looked up from the notepad and mouthed, "Got her." The call was not enough to expose her affair, but it proved intent. June helped me organize everything. We made a timeline of every accusation, every planted item, every message, every public insult. Then June told me to request the security footage from the bookstore for the day the fake note appeared in my coat, because I had hung it near the staff area before the luncheon. The footage showed Brenna walking close to the rack with my coat in her hand, looking over her shoulder before slipping something into the pocket. When June and I watched it, I felt sadness before anger. Brenna had not invented this cruelty. She had inherited it and called it loyalty. I sent the footage to Adrian without comment. He called me within 2 minutes, breathing hard. "Maren," he said, "Brenna put the note in your coat." I answered, "Yes." He said, "My God." I waited. He said, "I am going to confront her." I said, "Do what you need to do, but do not warn your mother about everything I know." He went quiet. "Everything?" I replied, "Adrian, your mother is not only lying about me." He asked, "Is this about the hotel receipts?" I closed my eyes. "Yes," he whispered. "I found something too." That was the first time his fear sounded useful. Adrian told me Harrison had asked him to review some family trust paperwork for a property sale. While looking through older transfers, Adrian found repeated payments to a consulting company called Shaw Coastal Advising. The amounts were not huge enough to alarm a banker, but they were regular, quiet, and unnecessary. "The company is connected to Clifton Shaw?" Adrian said. I looked him up. "He used to work with Dad years ago." I asked, "Did your father approve the payments?" Adrian said, "I don't know, but the authorization notes were made through Mom's access." I looked at June, who was listening beside me, and she lifted both eyebrows as if to say the door had opened itself. The next week became a quiet hunt. Adrian did not move back to my side completely overnight, but doubt had finally turned toward the right person. He checked dates. I checked messages. June helped us understand which documents mattered and which were only smoke. We learned that Clifton Shaw owned a struggling development company near the coast. We learned that Meredith had attended committee meetings on the same afternoons Clifton made hotel bookings. We learned that Shaw Coastal Advising had received money from a family-controlled account tied to Harrison's private investments. And then, because arrogance makes people sloppy, Meredith sent Clifton a message from an old tablet she had left synced to the house Wi-Fi account. "She is asking questions. Adrian is weak, but not stupid. We need to be careful until I remove her." Adrian brought the tablet to June's house like a man carrying a live bomb. He placed it on the kitchen table and said, "I found this in the office cabinet. It was still logged in." June did not touch it at first. She said, "Do not play hero with evidence. Photograph where you found it, keep it charged, and do not alter anything." Adrian looked at me and said, "She wrote that she needed to remove you." I asked, "Do you believe me now?" His face twisted. "I should have believed you before proof became convenient." That was the first honest thing he had said in days. I wanted to forgive him immediately, but pain has its own calendar. I said, "Yes, you should have." He sat across from me and said, "I am sorry for every second I made you stand alone in that house." I replied, "I needed a husband, not a witness." He nodded. "I know." June poured coffee like we were discussing weather instead of betrayal and said, "Apologies are lovely. Now decide what truth needs to do next." Adrian said, "My father needs to know." I answered, "Not from emotion, from evidence." He looked at me with a new kind of respect, and I realized Meredith had failed in one important way. She had tried to make me look unstable. Instead, she had taught me to become precise. The final trap came from Meredith herself. She invited me back for what she called a family conversation. Her message said, "If you care about your marriage, come to the house Friday evening. Harrison will be there. We can settle this privately." June read it and said, "Privately means she wants no witnesses." Adrian said, "I'll be there." I answered, "So will the truth." But I knew Meredith. She would not settle anything privately unless she had already prepared a public version. And sure enough, the next morning Brenna posted a vague message online about Protecting brothers from women with hidden lives. By noon, Meredith had invited relatives to dinner under the excuse of discussing Harrison's upcoming anniversary fundraiser. She wanted an audience, so I gave her one. Before I went back, June asked me one final question. "What do you want, Maren?" I said. "I want my name cleared." She nodded. "And after that?" I looked at the folder on the table, thick with printed screenshots, transfer records, hotel receipts, security stills, and Meredith's own messages. I want her to feel 1 minute of the helplessness she served me every day. June studied me, then said, "Good. Just make sure justice is driving, not rage. Rage speeds. Justice arrives." I smiled faintly and answered, "Then I will arrive on time." Friday evening, I walked into the Vale house wearing a simple black dress and carrying the folder in a plain canvas tote. Meredith was in the kitchen, the same kitchen where she would later try to destroy me with the fake message. Harrison stood near the island, Adrian beside him, Brenna leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. Two of Adrian's aunts were in the breakfast room, pretending not to listen. Meredith smiled when she saw me and said, "How brave of you to come." I said, "How careful of you to invite witnesses." She laughed softly. Still dramatic. I looked at the room and answered, "No. Just finished being quiet for your convenience." Meredith placed my phone on the counter. My stomach tightened because I had left that phone in my coat pocket for less than 5 minutes when I arrived. Beside it lay my wedding ring, which I had removed earlier while washing my hands, and on the screen was a message from an unknown number. "I miss you." He still has no idea, does he? Adrian looked at it, then at me. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he did not look confused. He looked angry. Meredith saw that and rushed to speak. "Adrian, I know this is painful, but you must stop protecting her. She has lied to all of us. She has made a fool of you. She brought shame into this house and then tried to blame me because she could not bear being exposed." Brenna added, "Maren, just admit it. This whole innocent act is exhausting." Harrison's face was pale. He looked at me and said, "Did you receive that message?" I said, "No, Harrison. Your wife placed it there, or arranged for it to appear. The same way Brenna placed the note in my coat, and Meredith placed her pearls in my bag." Brenna snapped, "That is insane." Adrian turned to her and said, "I saw the footage." The room shifted. Brenna's mouth opened, then closed. Meredith's smile faltered only a little, but her eyes moved to Adrian with warning. "You are letting her manipulate you," she said. Adrian replied, "No, Mom. I am finally watching." Meredith changed strategy. She moved toward Harrison, her voice breaking. "Do you hear what this girl is doing? She is turning my children against me. She is accusing me of crimes because she wants control of this family. Harrison, please." Harrison put one hand on the counter and asked quietly, "Maren, what do you have?" Meredith cut in before I could answer. "She has nothing but resentment." I opened my tote and removed the folder. "Actually," I said, "I have dates." Meredith went still. I continued, "I have messages. I have security footage. I have transfer records to Shaw Coastal Advising. I have hotel receipts from afternoons you said you were at church committee meetings. And I have the message you sent Clifton Shaw saying Adrian was weak, but not stupid, and that you needed to remove me." No one spoke. The house made small sounds around us. The refrigerator hum, the distant tick of a clock. Brenna's quick breathing. Harrison looked at Meredith, and something in his face seemed to age 10 years at once. "Who is Clifton Shaw to you now?" he asked. Meredith's lips parted. "An old business contact." I slid one receipt across the counter. "Room 418 does not look like a business contact." Meredith whispered, "You had no right." I said, "To what? Notice what you hid while you were calling me unfaithful?" She turned on me then, mask gone, and hissed, You little vulture. Adrian stepped forward, but I raised one hand, not because I needed his protection, but because I wanted Meredith to hear me without interruption. You stood in this kitchen and called me a stain, I said. You told your son I was cheating. You planted notes, staged messages, hid jewelry in my bag, and used your daughter to help frame me. You told me women like me do not survive wars with women like you. But you made one mistake, Meredith. You thought cruelty was the same thing as intelligence. Meredith's face flushed. You think you have won because you printed a few papers? She said. You know nothing about marriage, nothing about family, nothing about what women like me have to do to keep a life together. Harrison's voice came low and rough. Were you with him? Meredith looked at her husband then, and all her fury cracked into fear. Harrison, it is complicated. Those 3 words destroyed more than any confession could have. Harrison sat down slowly. Adrian whispered, Mom. Brenna shook her head and said, No, she is lying. Mom, tell them she is lying. Meredith grabbed Brenna's hand like a lifeline and said, I did what I had to do. I said, For 12 years? Harrison closed his eyes. 12? I opened the folder and placed the transfer summary in front of him. The earliest payment I found was 12 years ago. The hotel receipts begin later, or at least, the ones I found do. Meredith lunged for the papers, but Adrian caught her wrist, not hard, just firmly. She stared at him as if he had betrayed her by refusing to let her destroy the proof. Do not touch them, Adrian said. Meredith pulled away, shaking. You would choose her over your mother? Adrian's voice broke, but it did not bend. I am choosing the truth over the person who used me as a weapon. Meredith slapped him. It happened so fast, Brenna gasped, and Harrison rose from his chair. Adrian did not move except to turn his face back toward her. He said quietly, That is enough. Meredith looked at her hand as if it belonged to someone else. Then she pointed at me and said, This is your fault. I answered, No, this is your mirror. Harrison asked everyone to leave the kitchen except Meredith, Adrian, and me. The ants disappeared so quickly they nearly collided in the hallway. Brenna stayed until Harrison looked at her and said, Go. She whispered, Dad. But he repeated, Go, Brenna. When she left, Harrison picked up the transfer records with hands that trembled slightly. Did you use my account access? He asked Meredith. She said, I managed things you never paid attention to. He asked, Did you send him money from the trust? Meredith's expression sharpened. Do not act innocent, Harrison. You liked having a wife who handled the ugly parts of life. Harrison looked like he had been wounded in a place pride could not cover. The ugly part was you lying in my name. Meredith tried one last time to turn the knife toward me. And what about her? She said. You are all acting like Maren is some saint because she collected papers. Ask why she was watching me. Ask why she was so eager to tear this family apart. I said, You tore it apart and called the pieces tradition. Adrian looked at his father and said, Maren tried to warn me before she showed anyone. I did not listen. Harrison's face softened toward me, and that almost broke me more than his suspicion had. Maren, he said, I am ashamed that this happened under my roof. Meredith made a bitter sound. Oh, now she gets your sympathy too. Harrison turned to her and said, No, she gets my apology. That was the moment Meredith truly lost control. Not when the receipts appeared. Not when the transfers came out. Not even when Adrian stopped protecting her feelings. She lost control when Harrison apologized to me in front of her, because her power had always depended on being the woman whose pain mattered most. She stepped backward, her eyes wet now with real panic, and said, Harrison, please, we can discuss this privately. He answered, You wanted witnesses when you thought Maren would be humiliated. She whispered, I made mistakes. I said, You made plans. She glared at me, but there was no audience left willing to clap for her. The legal part began the next morning. Harrison's attorney froze the family trust accounts while an audit began. Clifton Shaw received a notice demanding documentation for every payment made to his company. Meredith moved into a hotel at first, claiming she needed space from the hysteria. But by the end of the week, her version of events had collapsed under the weight of documents she could not charm. Brenna called Adrian crying after Harrison showed her the bookstore footage and the transfer records. She said, "Mom told me the note was only to scare Maren into being honest. She said Maren was using you." Adrian replied, "And you believed that because believing it made you feel superior." Brenna said nothing for a long time, then whispered, "I am sorry." Adrian answered, "Do not say it to me first." Brenna came to see me at the bookstore 2 days later. I was arranging new releases on a table when she walked in wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy. She stood near the front display and said, "Can we talk?" I almost said no, but June's voice lived in my head now, telling me that dignity did not need to run. I said, "You can talk." Brenna swallowed and said, "I put the note in your coat. Mom told me you were cheating and that Adrian was too blind to see it. She said we had to help him." I looked at her and asked, "Did you ever ask yourself why helping him required lying?" Her mouth trembled. "No, I wanted you to be what she said you were." I answered, "That is probably the most honest thing anyone in your family has said to me." She cried then, quietly, not beautifully. "I am sorry, Maren. I know that is not enough." I said, "It is not." She nodded, accepting it. "Will you ever forgive me?" I placed a stack of books on the table and said, "Maybe one day, but forgiveness is not a door people get to kick open because guilt makes them uncomfortable." Brenna wiped her face and whispered, "That sounds fair." I replied, "It is more fairness than you gave me." She left without arguing, and that mattered. It was the first time a Vale woman had walked away from me without trying to win. Adrian and I did not magically become fine. That would be too simple, and real damage does not disappear just because the villain is exposed. For weeks, we lived in a careful space between love and consequence. He moved out of the family house and rented a small apartment downtown. I visited, but I did not move in right away. One evening, he made dinner badly, burning the chicken and overcooking the rice, and when he apologized for that too, I almost laughed. He looked at me across the tiny table and said, "I am afraid everything I say sounds too late." I answered, "Some of it is too late, but not all of it." He put down his fork and said, "Tell me what repair looks like." I said, "It looks like therapy, boundaries, no private meetings with your mother, no asking me to swallow disrespect because confrontation makes you tired, and no confusing peace with silence." He listened. He did not defend himself. That was new. "I will do all of that," he said. I asked, "Because you want me back?" He answered, "Because I should have been that man even if you never came back." That sentence did not fix us, but it gave repair a place to begin. I moved into the apartment a month later, not because I had forgotten, but because he had started telling the truth without needing me to drag it out of him. He blocked Meredith's access to his calendar. He stopped answering calls that began with guilt. He told Harrison he would not discuss me with anyone unless I was present. Small locks, finally placed on the house of our marriage. Meredith tried to reach me several times. Her first message was an accusation. "You must be proud of yourself." I did not answer. Her second was a performance. "I hope someday you understand what it feels like to lose everything." I saved it and did not answer. Her third came after the audit found enough questionable transfers to force a civil settlement between Harrison and Clifton's company. It said, "I never wanted to hurt you this much." That one made me pause, because the words were almost human. Then I remembered her in the kitchen, smiling beside my wedding ring and a fake message, calling me a stain. I typed one sentence. "You did not hurt me by accident." Then I blocked her. Harrison filed for legal separation. He did not make a public scandal, but Charleston did what small social circles always do. It built the scandal from whispers, lunch invitations, missing appearances, and the sudden disappearance of Meredith Vale from every committee she once ruled. People who had laughed at her delicate insults now lowered their voices when her name came up. Clifton Shaw's wife, who had known less than everyone assumed, sent Harrison a letter through her attorney. I never read it, but Adrian told me his father sat alone with it for almost an hour. Betrayal had traveled farther than our house. Meredith had not only burned her own marriage, she had carried matches into other lives and called it survival. Months later, I saw Meredith once. It happened outside a legal office downtown, where Adrian and I had gone with Harrison to sign documents related to the audit. She stepped out of a black car wearing large sunglasses and a pale coat, looking smaller than I remembered, not because she had lost her sharpness, but because there was no room around her bending to it anymore. She saw me and stopped. Adrian's hand found mine, not to hold me back, but to stand with me. Meredith lowered her glasses and said, "I hope you are satisfied." I looked at her for a long moment and replied, "No. Satisfaction would have been you leaving me alone before any of this happened." She said, "You took my son." Adrian answered before I could. "No, Mom. You almost made me lose my wife. There is a difference." Meredith's mouth trembled with rage, but she had no stage, no planted evidence, no daughter ready to echo her lines, no husband willing to mistake her cruelty for elegance. She looked at me and said, "You think truth makes you clean?" I answered, "No, but lies made you visible." For once, she had nothing ready. She walked past us into the building, and I realized I did not feel triumphant in the way I had imagined. I felt steady. That was better. Triumph still belongs partly to the person who hurt you. Steadiness belongs to you. A year after our wedding, Adrian and I hosted dinner in our apartment. It was small, warm, and imperfect. Harrison came with flowers and a pie he bought because he did not know how to bake but wanted to contribute. June came too, wearing red lipstick and carrying a bottle of sparkling cider because she said alcohol made people confess too much, and she preferred confessions obtained through paperwork. Brenna arrived late, nervous, holding a gift bag with a handwritten note inside. She had been attending counseling, Adrian told me, and had stopped speaking to Meredith except through short, necessary messages. I did not trust her fully, but I no longer needed to hate her to protect myself. During dinner, Harrison raised his glass and said, "To quieter houses and better truths." June snorted and said, "To locked drawers opening themselves." Adrian looked at me, his eyes soft with all the regret and love we were still learning to carry correctly. "To Maren," he said, "for staying calm when none of us deserved her calm." I shook my head and said, "Do not turn my survival into a personality trait." Everyone went quiet, and then June laughed so hard Harrison nearly spilled his drink. Adrian smiled and corrected himself. "To Maren," he said again, "for telling the truth when we made it difficult." That one I accepted. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood in the kitchen washing plates while Adrian dried them beside me. He said, "Do you ever wish you had exposed her sooner?" I thought about the note in my coat, the necklace in my bag, the fake message on my phone, the way my husband had stepped back before learning to step forward. I said, "Sometimes. But if I had exposed her too early, she would have survived it." People like Meredith do not fall because someone accuses them. They fall when their own pattern becomes impossible to deny. Adrian nodded slowly and said, "And us?" I handed him a plate and answered, "We survive if we never make silence our religion again." I still think about that first morning in Meredith's house, when she corrected the breakfast table and told me ordinary was not acceptable. She was wrong about so many things, but especially that. Ordinary kindness would have saved her family. Ordinary honesty would have protected her marriage. Ordinary respect would have kept her son close. But Meredith wanted power dressed as elegance, cruelty dressed as standards, and lies dressed as concern. In the end, she lost to the one thing she had always underestimated: a woman who could stand still long enough for the truth to catch up. And if you ask me what revenge looked like, I will tell you it was not screaming. It was not throwing wine, breaking plates, or begging a room to believe me. Revenge looked like a folder on a kitchen counter. It looked like dates, receipts, screenshots, and one locked drawer that should have stayed closed if Meredith Vale had not been foolish enough to build my disgrace on top of her own secret. She tried to break my marriage by painting me as unfaithful. She forgot that women who live inside lies often accuse others first. She forgot that a calm woman is not always weak. Sometimes she is only waiting for the screen to turn on. Commentary. Let's step back from the final exposure for a moment and look at what this story is really doing underneath the drama. On the surface, it is a revenge story about a cruel mother-in-law, a framed daughter-in-law, a weak husband, and a secret affair that finally comes out. But beneath that, it is about control. Meredith did not simply dislike Maren. She wanted to own the meaning of Maren's life inside that family. She wanted to decide who Maren was before Maren could prove herself. That is why every insult, every fake message, every planted object, and every public accusation feels so personal. Meredith was not just attacking Maren's marriage. She was trying to take control of her identity. And that is what makes Meredith terrifying in a quiet way. She is not the kind of villain who loses control immediately. She is polished, socially careful, and emotionally strategic. She understands that if she screams, people may see her cruelty clearly. So she uses a softer knife. She says hurtful things with a calm face. She calls judgment concern. She calls humiliation standards. She calls control family protection. That kind of person can be incredibly hard to fight because they know how to injure someone while keeping the room on their side. And if the victim reacts strongly, the manipulator simply points and says, "See? I told you she was unstable." That is exactly the trap Meredith keeps setting for Maren. She wants Maren to break publicly. She wants tears, panic, shouting, desperate explanations, and emotional collapse. Not because Meredith enjoys drama alone, but because drama would become evidence. If Maren cries too much, Meredith can say she is unstable. If Maren gets angry, Meredith can say she is disrespectful. If Maren leaves the house, Meredith can say she is guilty. If Maren stays quiet, Meredith can say silence proves shame. That is the cruel genius of Meredith's behavior. She creates a situation where every possible response can be twisted against the person she is hurting. Now ask yourself this: how many people in real life lose their reputation not because they did something wrong, but because the person accusing them knows how to manage the room better? That is one reason this story hits so hard. Maren has the truth, but Meredith has position. Meredith is older, wealthier, socially established, and already trusted by the family. Maren is new. She is the outsider. She is the young wife who has not yet earned the family's full protection. So when Meredith begins planting doubts, those doubts do not fall into an empty room. They fall into a room Meredith has already prepared. This is why the early humiliations matter. The comments about Maren's background, her manners, her clothes, her place in the family, and her supposed lack of polish are not random insults. They are preparation. Meredith is teaching everyone to see Maren as less than them. She is building a quiet story around her. Maren is ambitious. Maren is ungrateful. Maren does not belong. Maren is not quite honest. Maren is not one of us. Then, when the fake note appears or the necklace is found in her bag, the family is emotionally ready to believe it. That is how character assassination works. The final accusation is usually planted long after the first seed. Maren's patience is one of the most important parts of the story, and it should not be confused with weakness. Some viewers might think, why didn't she fight back sooner? But when you are newly married and living inside your husband's family system, every response has consequences. If she speaks too early, she looks dramatic. If she pushes Adrian too hard, Meredith says she is dividing mother and son. If she exposes a partial clue, Meredith explains it away and becomes more careful. Maren understands this slowly. She learns that the truth must be strong enough to survive Meredith's performance. That is why her revenge takes shape through restraint. And honestly, restraint is one of the hardest forms of strength. It is easy to imagine revenge as a loud, emotional moment where the victim finally explodes. But Maren's revenge is more disciplined than that. She watches, she records, she asks better questions, she saves messages, she notices dates. She does not give Meredith the messy, emotional reaction Meredith wants. Instead of throwing pain into the room, she builds a record so solid that even Meredith's most polished lies cannot climb over it. That is not passive. That is strategic survival. Adrian is probably the character audiences will argue about the most. Some will say he is weak and does not deserve Maren. Others will say he was manipulated by a mother who had controlled his emotional world for his entire life. Both reactions make sense. He loves Maren, but he fails to protect her early enough. He tells himself he is keeping peace, but that peace comes at Maren's expense. And that is the painful truth about people who avoid conflict. They often think they are staying neutral, but neutrality can become a gift to the person doing harm. A marriage cannot survive on private loyalty alone. Adrian may reassure Maren behind closed doors, but Meredith attacks her in public, in family conversations, and through planted evidence. Private apologies cannot repair public humiliation. If your spouse is being accused in front of everyone, then defending them only in private is not enough. Maren needed Adrian to stand beside her when the room was watching. Instead, he hesitated. That hesitation becomes one of the deepest wounds in the story, because betrayal does not always sound like an accusation. Sometimes betrayal sounds like silence. Still, the story does not make Adrian a cartoon villain, and that matters. He is not Meredith. He is not cruel for pleasure. He is a man caught between the woman he married and the mother who trained him to feel guilty for questioning her. That does not excuse him, but it explains why his growth has to be painful. He has to realize that his mother has not only hurt Maren, she has used him as a weapon. She has taken his love, his confusion, his need for family peace, and turned all of it against his wife. When he finally sees that, he does not simply discover Meredith's lie. He discovers his own failure to resist it sooner. This raises a difficult question for the audience. When someone you love is manipulated into doubting you, how much of that can you forgive? Is the manipulation enough to explain their hesitation, or does love require them to trust you before the evidence becomes impossible to ignore? There is no easy answer. That is why Maren's choice at the end feels mature. She does not pretend everything is instantly healed because Adrian finally sees the truth. She asks for boundaries, therapy, distance from Meredith, and real change. She does not want a dramatic apology. She wants a different marriage. June Pritchard brings a different kind of power into the story. She is not glamorous, wealthy, or socially dominant like Meredith. But she has something Meredith lacks: moral clarity. June understands systems. She understands records. She understands how lies behave once they enter a room. When she tells Maren not to fight emotion with emotion, she is not asking her to become cold. She is teaching her how to survive a manipulator who feeds on emotional reactions. June's wisdom gives Maren a way out of the fog. She becomes the person who reminds Maren that dignity and strategy can stand together. That is such an important contrast between Meredith and June. Both are older women. Both are intelligent. Both can read people. But Meredith uses her intelligence to dominate, while June uses hers to protect. Meredith turns family into a battlefield. June turns Maren's pain into a plan. Meredith weaponizes age and status. June offers experience without demanding obedience. In a story full of toxic family power, June represents a healthier kind of authority, the kind that does not need to control you in order to guide you. The planted pearl necklace is one of the cruelest incidents because it is designed to humiliate Maren in a way that looks undeniable. A missing object. A shocked family. A handbag opened in front of everyone. A piece of evidence appearing exactly where Meredith needs it to appear. The horror of that scene is not only that Maren is innocent, it is that innocence suddenly looks useless. Everyone can see the necklace. Everyone can feel the accusation. And because Meredith has already spent so much time shaping the family's view of Maren, the lie has a place to land. That scene also shows how dangerous appearances can be. People often say, "I only believe what I see." But what we see can be arranged by someone dishonest. The necklace in the bag looks like proof, but it is actually theater. Meredith understands that most people react to visible evidence before they ask who placed it there. That is why Maren's later approach is so powerful. She does not fight one staged image with another emotional claim. She builds a pattern that shows how the staging works. She moves the family from "look what we found" to "who keeps creating these moments." The affair with Clifton Shaw gives the story its strongest reversal. Meredith spends the entire story accusing Maren of disloyalty while carrying her own betrayal in secret. That hypocrisy is not just satisfying as a twist, it reveals Meredith's psychology. She accuses Maren of the very sin she is hiding because guilty people often project their own corruption onto someone else. By making Maren look unfaithful, Meredith hopes to draw attention away from herself. It is almost as if she believes accusation can become camouflage. If everyone is looking at Maren, no one is looking at Meredith's hotel receipts, messages, and financial transfers. The financial transfers matter because they raise the betrayal from personal to structural. If Meredith had only been having an affair, that would already be devastating. But when money from family accounts starts moving toward Clifton's world, the betrayal becomes larger. Harrison is not simply a husband who has been cheated on. He is a man whose trust, name, and financial life have been used without honesty. Adrian is not simply a son whose mother lied. He is part of a family system that has been quietly manipulated for years. Maren is not simply a daughter-in-law being disliked. She becomes the person whose suffering accidentally leads to a larger truth. That is one reason Meredith becomes increasingly desperate. Maren is not dangerous because she is loud. She is dangerous because she notices inconsistencies. A receipt where there should be no receipt. A locked drawer no one is supposed to mention. A schedule that repeats too perfectly. A fake accusation that appears exactly when Meredith needs it. A message that reveals too much. These small details are the cracks in Meredith's wall. And once Maren starts seeing the cracks, Meredith must either silence her or discredit her. Since Meredith cannot control Maren's mind, she tries to destroy Maren's reputation. Brenna's role is painful because she shows how children can inherit cruelty as a family habit. She is not innocent. She plants the note. She mocks Maren. She repeats Meredith's contempt. But she is also a product of the emotional climate Meredith created. That does not remove responsibility, but it gives the story more depth. Brenna has been trained to equate loyalty with obedience and superiority with belonging. She thinks defending her mother means attacking Maren. She thinks protecting Adrian means helping Meredith frame his wife. That is how toxic family systems reproduce themselves. People confuse cruelty with loyalty. When Brenna apologizes later, Maren's response is important. She does not attack Brenna, but she does not instantly forgive her either. That is emotionally honest. Real apologies do not erase real harm. Brenna's regret may be sincere, but Maren still has the right to decide how close she wants Brenna to be. This is something audiences should think about. If someone hurts you because they believed a lie they wanted to believe, are they entitled to immediate forgiveness once the truth comes out? Or does the damage still deserve time, distance, and consequences? The final kitchen exposure works because Meredith believes she is entering another performance, but Maren has changed the script. Meredith brings fake evidence. Maren brings documentation. Meredith brings emotional pressure. Maren brings a timeline. Meredith expects Adrian to hesitate. This time, he watches his mother instead. Meredith expects Harrison to trust her. This time, he asks questions. Meredith expects Brenna to echo her. This time, Brenna is shaken by the proof. The room Meredith built for Maren's humiliation becomes the room where Meredith's control collapses. What makes that revenge satisfying is that Maren does not become vicious. She could have screamed. She could have mocked Meredith. She could have turned the moment into a performance of her own. But she does not need to. She has something stronger than anger. Proof. The receipts, transfers, messages, and footage do the work Meredith never expected them to do. Maren's calmness becomes more powerful than any outburst because it shows the room that she is not trying to create a story. She is revealing the one Meredith tried to bury. There is a beautiful irony in the fact that Meredith, who spent the entire story controlling appearances, is ultimately defeated by records. A person who lives through performance fears documentation because documentation does not care about tone. A screenshot does not care how elegant you sound. A bank transfer does not care how wounded your face looks. A receipt does not care whether you are respected at church lunches. Paper has no social loyalty. That is why Meredith cannot charm her way out of the final moment. The proof does not love her, fear her, or owe her anything. Harrison's apology to Maren is quiet but meaningful. He is not the main villain, but he did benefit from not seeing clearly. He trusted Meredith's version of reality because it was comfortable. He allowed Maren to remain under suspicion because questioning his wife would have forced him to question his whole life. When he finally apologizes, the apology matters because he is no longer protecting Meredith's image. He is acknowledging Maren's reality. For someone who has been doubted, that kind of acknowledgement can be deeply healing, even if it comes late. Meredith's downfall is not just that she loses her marriage or social position. Her real punishment is that she loses the power to define everyone else. She can no longer tell Adrian who to trust. She can no longer tell Harrison what their marriage means. She can no longer tell Brenna who deserves contempt. She can no longer tell Maren who she is. For a woman like Meredith, that is devastating. Control was her language. Once the truth removes that control, she does not know how to stand in the room as just another person with consequences. The ending between Maren and Adrian is stronger because it does not pretend love is enough by itself. Love may be the reason they try again, but boundaries are the reason they have a chance. Adrian has to move out of his mother's emotional reach. He has to stop giving Meredith private access to the marriage. He has to understand that avoiding conflict almost cost him the woman he loved. Maren has to decide whether his changed behavior is real enough to trust. That is not a fairy tale ending. It is a grown-up ending. It understands that repair is work, not a single emotional speech. One of the most interesting questions in the story is whether Maren's revenge is really revenge or simply truth with timing. She does not invent punishment. She does not frame Meredith. She does not return cruelty with cruelty. She waits until Meredith creates one lie too many, then she opens the door to reality. Maybe that is the cleanest kind of revenge, not becoming the villain's opposite weapon, but becoming the person who refuses to let the villain's version survive. Maren does not destroy Meredith's life. Meredith's own choices do that. Maren only stops protecting Meredith from the consequences. There is also a lesson here about how families often mistake silence for peace, Before Maren, the Vale family probably looked stable. Harrison trusted Meredith. Adrian obeyed her emotional rules. Brenna repeated her judgments. Everyone knew how to behave around the matriarch. But that was not peace. That was a system. Maren disrupted it because she would not fully surrender to the role Meredith assigned her. Toxic families often blame the person who breaks the silence, but the silence was never healthy. It was only hiding the damage. So I want to ask you, as the audience, what would you have done if you were Maren? Would you have left the first time Adrian doubted you? Would you have stayed and collected evidence? Would you have exposed Meredith privately? Or would you have waited until the family saw the full truth? There is no simple answer because every choice carries pain. Leaving early protects your heart, but it may leave the lie standing. Waiting for proof clears your name, but it requires strength most people should never have to use. That is what makes Maren's story so emotionally intense. Her victory costs her something. And what about Adrian? Does he deserve the second chance Maren gives him? Some viewers will say yes because he eventually confronts Meredith, apologizes, and changes his behavior. Others will say no because he should have trusted Maren before the evidence became undeniable. Personally, I think the story makes his second chance conditional, and that is why it works. Maren does not reward him for being late. She requires him to become different. If he wants the marriage, he has to prove that he can protect it without needing a folder full of evidence first. Brenna is another question. Her apology is necessary, but is it enough? She helped create pain that Maren had to live through. She participated in a lie because it made her feel loyal and superior. That kind of harm cannot be erased by tears. At the same time, the story leaves room for her to grow, and that feels realistic. Not every person raised inside a toxic system stays loyal to it forever, but if they want to change, they must accept that the people they hurt are not obligated to welcome them back quickly. For me, the emotional center of the story is not the affair, the money, or even the final exposure. It is Maren's refusal to let Meredith's accusations become her identity. Meredith calls her unfaithful, greedy, unstable, ordinary, and unworthy. But Maren does not internalize those names. She carries pain, yes, but she does not let pain make her careless. She stays close to the truth until the truth is strong enough to stand in the room with her. That is what makes her victory feel powerful. She does not simply defeat Meredith, she remains herself while doing it. In the end, Meredith loses because she underestimates the woman she tried to erase. She thinks Maren's calmness means fear. She thinks Maren's patience means weakness. She thinks Maren's lack of social power means she has no way to fight back. But calm is not always surrender. Patience is not always helplessness. And sometimes the person being humiliated in silence is the same person quietly building the case that will end the performance. Meredith tried to break Maren's marriage by inventing an affair. She never imagined her own affair would become the truth that broke her power.